I can go shirtless.
Weird.
That's okay, Joel. You can keep your shirt on for this one. We're recording. We're just rolling right into it. We got the whole gang here. Of course, we had Joel, and then somehow we lost him, but he'll come back to us. I promise. We really actually need him for this podcast.
Yeah, he's smarter.
he's an essential piece. Looks like he's connecting here as we get started. Yeah, so we wanted to do a podcast on every now and then, strange phenomena happen, right? There's a lunar eclipse. There's a pestilence of scarab beetles, like in The Mummy, crossing over a sand dune. And also there's a high quality article posted to Swimswam and nobody reads it. And so we decided to read it. In fact, I think all of us has probably read it a few times over at this point. And then we're going to take it to the next level by spending an hour discussing it. And then I'm working on getting in contact with the author of said article and inviting him on so that we can talk even more about something that people apparently have no interest in, but we have interest in it. And that's the point. That's what we do in this podcast. We just talk about what we're interested in. We don't care what you're interested in.
Or exactly. Or in the case of last week's podcast, where I talked about something I was interested in and Chris destroyed it.
No, I keep the attitude going. I'm not interested in it, Eric. So
yeah, I try to give the people a little bit of an insight to what we are, what would like, and then I start talking about, having some kind of other thing in my life other than swimming,
Joel,
and music. And Chris is like, You're just making shit up. These bands don't exist.
Joel, you've known him longer. Has he always been this whiny about this kind of stuff?
He's set in his ways. Sure.
I have been my ways of all three of us.
It's a week later, and you're still grinding your axe about the fact that I didn't like your random punk band.
Because this is how often we do the podcast. It's been a week. I've been waiting to be able to give you shit. Yeah.
Well,
got it.
Listen, Eric.
That's why Chris is an acquaintance and not a friend.
Yeah.
A colleague.
I want to talk to you about the rules of the game, guys. And that's the name of the article. And we've got Rules of the Game Part 1 and Rules of the Game Part 2. And I was telling somebody about this article, and they responded in the same way that one of the Swimswam commenters said. I said, there's this amazing article on Swimswam. It's called Rules of the Game. It's written by a Finnish guy. And they went, well, what's the takeaway from the article? And I went, you need to just read it. They go, well, what do you get out of it? And I'm going, no, you don't get it. You need to read it. Yeah. This is not an article where it's like, okay, got it. Hips up on freestyle. Got it. Yep. Here we go.
Yeah, there we go. And then it becomes, I already knew that, so I don't have to read it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. I get it. Yeah. Yeah. There's so many things that you can take away from this article. And one of them, I think, is, again, you see like what's getting the most likes, what gets the most comments, what even gets the most hatred. It's always like video. And I really think kind of how swimming is evolving right now is like, if it's not like a YouTube clip, like put with some music behind it, people aren't going to watch it. If it's not a quick kind of like commentary and like Brett Hawk's kind of got obviously a really popular podcast, but it's one of those things where it'll be like what Brett is interested in. He's interested probably in sprint a lot. He does a lot of other things too, but you can see him get more interested in sprint. He's like, yes. And he gets all fired up. And so he kind of like, that becomes a little bit more of the narrative. And again, it's not like, I get it. Like when a college coach is like, all right, yeah, I want to see what the sprint stuff. But like when a 12 and under coach is like, yeah, I really want to watch the Brett Hawk podcast on like 50 freestyle training. Like it's a different thing entirely. And I think this one's really good because it's kind of a foundational one, but you have to read. And I think that's something, again, where a lot of coaches might not really be there. Not to sound like, like an East Coast elitist, but
right. You're a West Coast elitist. That's what you are.
No, I'm just one of those hippie guys. And so think about everyone that that's read like Swimming Faster or Swimming Fastest or all those. I mean, those are big books. I would like to know how many like under 20, 30 like have read that versus, well, I read an excerpt of it, but it is, I think it's just kind of where we're at culture wise, where everything is like the shorter video segment where, like you said, what do I get out of it? I got a lot of stuff on my plate. Just what's the gist of the article? And then a lot of times it becomes, yeah, okay, I know that already. I don't need to look any further. And so that's what's interesting is anytime you can kind of at least, even looking at the stuff you think, just to re-challenge or I don't know, strengthen that your beliefs in something, I guess. Yeah.
So Joel, I want to dive right in with you because I feel like we've made light of the fact that Eric does the most reading out of the three of us, but all of a sudden we were getting text messages from you that you were on page 4 of your notes.
Yeah.
Just on the first. So your notes are much, much longer than this actual article. So I feel like, it probably would be best just to dive in with some of your impressions here, and we'll have a little conversation back and forth. And maybe we're going to work on some questions for when I get Jukka on the podcast, which I hope to do here in the near future. So we can get into even greater depth on some of what's in here.
Yeah, I thought some of the interesting things was, I think what it points out too is a lot of it, maybe it's just the United States. I don't know as much. Obviously, you know far more about international coaching than I do. We're very reductionist. We're always like, what's the one vitamin I need that I'm going to live forever? Is it B12? I'll take B12, versus like kind of the holistic kind of thing. And the same thing here, we're like, we've already in the rules of the game, and maybe the title is one of those things that kind of turn people off, where it's kind of like, what the hell?
Yeah, this guy from Finland's going to tell me how it all works. Like, come on.
I feel like maybe this was just, this was an interpretation of what he wrote in Finnish, and this is what it came out in English. And people are like, this totally puts off Americans, this title, which is unfortunate.
Right,
it's good content.
Yeah, and like basically it's kind of, I think it got reduced to, you have training and you have technique, and there's enough people like on the boom are like, okay, that's arts and crafts kind of stuff, whatever. Or people really buy into technique and they start to think one is bigger than the other. Or like training is like, you start to become so quantifiable, where like I do, zone 1, zone 2, or EN1, EN2, and I do this many of this, and we have this kind of results. And so if I want to do better results, maybe I just shift the focus on that. And I think this article is kind of saying you have to look at kind of more of a holistic approach rather than just, again, is it B12? Do I need B12? Do I need EN3? And so this is saying, again, it's the rules of the game, I think, changed in that. What they're saying is, and again, there's that the puzzle diagram of, it's the quality of movement is also driving a lot of this, because that's going to drive the technique, how you're moving through the water, how everything is, how the nervous system responds to the water is part of the quality of movement. And also the quality of movement is going to dictate, again, the energy systems. Is it something that becomes just, your whole body and the fascial systems, being utilized, or is it just like, I'm push pull kind of a thing? And so it kind of almost goes all the way back to like the Doc Councilman kind of thing, where like the hand's like a paddle kind of thing, push pull. And then, and so I just think, again, we keep on trying to reduce things so it's easier for us to grasp, again, just because we're all busy as coaches, versus how do you look at the big picture? And I think our model of having 50 kids in your group, that's what makes you a sustainable coach, because you have 50 kids paying into your salary, versus like, can we figure out a way to get a smaller group or more individualized attention?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things you point out there, and I think is really central to reading this, you talk about councilmen, and like I read a ton of councilmen growing up. Sure. And actually I was at a swim meet recently where I found a Doc Councilman book, and I found myself, it was in the hospitality room. And awesome. At one point, the other two coaches, like, there was nothing going on at the pool, so nobody judged me for this part. But the other two coaches were like, where have you been? And I realized I'd just been sitting in this room for 20, 30 minutes, because in the back, he had training logs. So like, this is a whole nother podcast, but he had training logs for Dawn Fraser. He had like, amazing, called up and, said like, hey, how does Dawn train for swimming? And it's totally fascinating. But I think, the thing is, in swimming, we can look back in time and go, like, now we have literally hundreds of high school 15, 16-year-olds who are faster than the Olympic champion from the 1970s in certain events, right? And you go like, wow, what an amazing leap. of performance. And the thing is that I think one of the things this article posits is we've still got huge untapped reserves of that kind of improvement in how fast we can go. But a lot of people tend to take that reductionist one. So even if they're looking at something like Councilman, they go like, what are my takeaways from Councilman? Like they'll go like, well, he said train a lot of yards. So like I should train a lot of yards. Done.
Right.
You know, like, and instead ignoring the fact that somebody like Councilman was a scientist and he was always trying to go like, am I right about this? Am I right about this? Am I right about this? What about this? What about that? You know, he was actually always questioning what he had rather than saying like, these are the rules, you know, he was always looking for something new. And I think, you know, if you're interested in unlocking that next quantum leap in performance, you ought to be thinking a little bit more critically about how we're doing things right now, rather than having those blinders on that like, this is the path towards fast swimming and I'm just going to follow what the best people are doing. And then I will be one of the best people.
Right. I think also looking at like these YouTube videos, sometimes I think as coaches, what we'll do is we'll try to figure out what they're doing. And so you get people that are good, like Eric, for instance, is far better swimmer than I ever was. And so what he might see in backstroke, he might relate to his body a little bit better. Like all of a sudden he's like, not like he's actually thinking like my shoulder would probably feel like this would feel like this, but he has a better intuitive understanding of probably what the movement looks like, versus me where I wasn't very good. I'm like, maybe I'm trying to break down like what I see as like the shape or the angle that they're holding the water, or what I think, again, this is the one thing that Phelps is doing well. Therefore, if I have my butterflyers do this, they will do well. And I think that's the thing is, again, maybe sometimes us looking at things, translating into our head what that athlete might be feeling, and then trying to explain to our athletes what they should be feeling, so much is lost in that translation. And as this one said in the rules, like people just start to emerge. And I think what we've seen, like going into this Olympics, this Olympics, he kind of says that you can see where the limitations are coming. But in this things that we talked about, like watching these, these teen phenoms emerge, and maybe it's because, especially in these other countries, maybe because it's not like we become so professional that this is the way you have to do it, that allow them to kind of experiment and play around a little bit. And I used to, talk to Eric about his upbringing. Eric was a pool rat. He was one of those kids that, like, mom give you $3, don't spend it all before noon, and you hang out at the pool from 8 a.m. until, whenever they come back to pick you up. And so I think you learn things about moving through the water and efficiency of movement differently, that someone's like, yeah, I swim practice for 1 hour, and then you don't go back to the pool again because you're like, I'm kind of burnt out. I did my swim practice, mom, I'm done.
Right.
And, obviously it's, I think, the change of society and how things are going too is part of it, where, you just don't, drop your kids off in the pool anymore because you're terrified of all the things that possibly bad could happen or something like that. And I think also all the coaches and all the parents have so many more time restraints. And I think a lot of the things of this experimentation where you want, like, I want to see X, Y, and Z by the time they're 12. Otherwise, I don't feel they're getting anything out of the sport.
Right. Erica, we've been dominating the conversation for a little while. So I want to hear from you. What was some stuff that you read? I'm going to stick to, we might need to break this even into 2 pods. I'm going to stick to Rules of the Game Part 1. What's some stuff you read in there that you were going like, that made you go, huh?
I mean, I have it up right next to me because even though I've read it a couple of times, I still like, I have to keep going back and referencing it. And my coaching experience and my life experience relative to these 2 guys, I was not a part of the inner circle of Nelms at any point. I always getting like secondhand stuff, or Joel would see a video and share it with us, and then we would get this string of 10 text messages about stuff within the body, and just trying to wrap my head around it. But what I found that I liked about it in particular was, I mean, just the stuff that we had talked about in the past is the pelvis, the foundation of where everything comes from, the inside out part. And it's something that I had started to approach my coaching in terms of what's going on in the water, that I see it. When Joel and I were working at UWM, that was the first time that somebody had ever mentioned, don't look at the arms, don't look at the legs, look at what's going in the middle of the body, where's the breakdown there. So whether that's the neck or the pelvis and the abs and stuff like that, the low back, and then work your way out that way. So to see that again is just kind of a confirmation of something that I had heard in the past. I do like the way that he's just he's speaking to it, and he's speaking to the idea that we don't have it figured out without saying, I have it figured out.
Right.
And I think the problem that we probably have with some people that we're arguing with just read the article is they read into that regardless. Like, this guy is writing about it, therefore he thinks he has the exact answer. And and that's the most difficult part about being in America that we are in dealing with some of the people that we have worked with, do work with, whatever, is that I hope that I hope there are people able to get past that and just realize, like, there's, like you said, there's so much more that's left. I don't even know, like, it's just, there's so much in what feels like, I mean, overall, it's a brief synopsis of what is there. And then obviously he's going to go into the detail at some point with other releases, whether it's free or whether you have to pay for access. This is something that's certainly worth the money that they would charge for in being able to understand a bit better. And I guess the biggest thing is differentiating like technique and mechanics and all that stuff, and how the terms aren't exactly what they actually are. And we've been just going about it. Maybe we've been going about it all the wrong way.
Yeah.
But I think.
Yeah. Joel, I want to go back to you because Eric brought some stuff up there. Then there is a part of this where we were asking ourselves over text, like, has this guy been exposed to Milton Helms? Because some of the language just sounded so familiar. Do you know what I mean? I mean, even just the term quality of movement sets off my Milton Helms alarm bells, I go like, did this guy, did he make his way over to Sweden? Not out of the picture and see something. It's definitely one of the questions I'm going to ask him when I get to talking with him. But I hear too in what Eric's saying, ever since I got exposed to Milt, I would say I came to view technique as a dirty word, because I think when a lot of people think of technique, they do think from the extremities in rather than from the inside out of any kind of movement. We got to work on technique. We got to fix his pinky's too high when he's catching in freestyle. Do you know what I mean? We got to fix that technique. Or they're thinking about some little mechanical piece of something and not sort of the broader system of the way the body moves. And I do think that came through in what he was writing about here, but I'm curious as to what you think.
Yeah, what I was wondering too is like I used to take, like obviously in undergrad you take a lot of science classes, and how all of a sudden ideas would propagate around similar people having similar ideas on separate parts of the world. And so that's what I always liked with, like, being around like Bill Boomer, is asking him what books or articles you've been reading, and just because again it's good to have the foundation. Same with Milt. And so again, the quality of movement thing, has been there. Like maybe this guy has a dance background or like a yoga or gymnastics, and then all of a sudden that kind of comes together too. And that'd be really interesting to see where this comes from. And that's, exactly. I think kind of going back to what you said about like people 15, 16-year-olds going now as fast as like Olympians in the 70s did. I remember I heard this one quote, I think Kasparov, and probably pronouncing the name wrong, but the chess master, and he was talking about, like, someone asked him, like, hey, could you beat the current grand champion, just like 20-year-old wonder kid or something? He's like, no, I can't, because A, I'm older, but B, he's basically where he's at because he has the foundation of all the previous grandmasters to build upon. And so the same thing with the kids now they have the coaches and people that have seen the 70s swims and what they can do. And so I think that was also part of the rules of the game, is foundationally, we keep on building upon what people in the past have done. And that's really helped us as well. And, you incorporate other, like the TED talk about the bigger, stronger, faster, like why Olympians keep getting faster, and technology is a big part. Eric and the Speedo Empire, making suits faster than ever before, lane lines, goggles, etc. So that's part of it. So the rules are a lot of different things like that. Obviously, nutrition and training is different. I love reading the old books of like, before like the 76 Olympics, I had like 4 steaks, 8 eggs, because protein was king. And then
filtered
I got in
cigarettes
a race,
instead of rolling your own.
a couple cigarettes to open the chest up and went. But then also the change in the rules, like what underwater's happened since 2000. Again, if you look at the 96 Olympics, which for us doesn't seem that long ago, but it's just, they dove in, got up and swam. And then all of a sudden 2000, all of a sudden someone starts breaking out like, hey, wait a minute, that person's going fast. And then all of a sudden everyone starts adopting that. And that becomes part of the rules.
Don't hate on Dennis Pankratov. He was doing that weird underwater kick in 96, but he was the only, well, I guess they're the backstrokers.
Him and the backstrokers.
But Misty Hyman missed the team in 96. Eric, that was the whole thing. She was coming on, but she swam faster post Olympic trials, and then I think that was when we moved Olympic trials to right before the meet, because we were like, we don't want to miss the person who's swimming fast. But I think that time
the information like dissemination is a lot slower, because it basically you wouldn't see a Hungarian swimmer until the Olympics hit. Right. And now, like, if you want to see one, you can pull up the grainy footage that we do and like, hey, look at that guy.
Yeah.
And then we were talking about it. Look at her pause again. But I think there's something going on in there. Right. But I think in the article said like using technique and physiology as the 2 cornerstones. And you think, okay, I've got it all covered. But again, like we were talking about the quality of the movement with how we are now. I remember one of the things I started incorporating just being in Division 3 was like, I'm thinking, well, these kids are in desks for 4, 6, 8 hours. They're on their cell phones. So thoracic mobility is going to be diminished, and so right there, that's lifestyle, but it's butterfly, it's breaststroke, it's freestyle. There's even in a long active stroke, there's some thoracic mobility has to be going on, but also the hip flexors have been turned off all day. Them getting up and sitting down, and how we do our weight room, where it's kind of, again, I don't have as big of a weight background, but a lot of times it seems like we're almost going, I want to look like that. How do I develop that muscle that looks like that? So I want the 6-pack abs. But what you really want is you want the things that come from that of like, the ability to move, the ability to like, again, getting in your turns and out. So it really doesn't matter what the muscle looks like, is how it functions. And I think we've gone more aesthetic than functionality on a lot of things. And I think that's kind of what the quality of movement that they're referring to talks about, is the integration of that with the nervous system. Because again, if your body's nervous system is paying attention to what's tight within it, what's not working, what's not functioning, because it's in a protection mode, obviously swimming is like not something that's going to be worried about. It's more like, geez, why is my hip flexor turned off right now? Why am I not moving?
Yeah, I'll give you a great example of that I remember from my own history of just studying little things. It's going to sound like such a silly example, but if you've seen the movie Creed, right, with Michael B. Jordan, and he's fighting another guy in it, and I mean, Michael B. Jordan got in incredible bodybuilding shape for that. He just like ripped abs, low body fat. He looks incredible, in his boxing trunks in that movie. And he's fighting a guy. The guy he's fighting in it is a real boxer, like a real professional boxer. That guy looks, in comparison to Michael B. Jordan, like a total schlub in boxing shorts, right? He's got very little muscle definition in comparison. I'm careful to say like he's fat, but he looks fat in comparison to Michael B. Jordan, right? Who has this wonderful aesthetic look. Now, not only in the movie, but in real life, that guy would absolutely destroy Michael B. Jordan in a boxing match. I mean, and he basically beats him in the boxing match. And I was listening to somebody commenting on it who was actually a boxer, and they said, well, isn't that unrealistic? I mean, Michael B. Jordan looked like so much better than him. Wouldn't he win if they were actually like in a real boxing match? He said, no, man, look, all the time. It happens all the time. Like, look at Tyson Fury. He keeps facing off against guys who look incredible in their boxing trunks, and he just clowns them because it's not a bodybuilding competition.
Or Manny Pacquiao. I remember looking at Manny Pacquiao, and you feel like he's trying to be like, there's nothing to him, but exactly, like, again, the quality of his movement is a lot different, and we don't recognize it obviously in a boxing movie. I'm sure boxers are like, can see the guy who's the schlub, like, just look how he's stepping and how smooth he steps, out of the punch. You're like, that guy's legit, and I think a lot of times what you've seen, like, again, working in college was nice because you've got, soccer coaches, you got football coaches, you got basketball coaches. They can come by and just be like, that's the star, isn't it? You're like, yeah, because again, there's that innate quality of movement that as a coach you kind of recognize, but you don't know how to coach that because again, it's just how they're wired.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right, Joel, what else you got on your notes? Oh, sorry, Joel. Eric was going to say something.
Well,
no, let Eric talk.
I wanted to
Eric
make it. I mean, Joel brought it up, and I know it. And you brought up the whole, pool rat thing, and just the life that I led. And it's interesting to see how we've all coached. I haven't coached in a while, but Chris, you're in it right now in terms of the life that these kids lead. And Joel spoke to it about how much they're sitting in chairs and on their phones with terrible posture. And you talked to being a pool rat, that was on the weekends. I would get dropped off at the Y, and I would have to go just shoot hoops and grab a racket and a ball from the desk, and then go into the pool for a while, and then go back to the basketball court, just keep myself entertained. And I remember, and Joel spoke to it too, and I think it's something that I'm hoping that's where this kind of goes in terms of recommendations, or here are some ideas as far as what you do with age groupers. So between the ages of 10 and 12, I actually spent 2 years in dance, and both what was considered jazz and tap. So kind of like ballet, but not necessarily on your toes or whatever. But at a really critical time in my physiological development between 10 and 12, where rhythm and tempo and body control were so important. And it really did give me a bit of a background in terms of just general movement. Now, it didn't translate entirely into my swimming career. There's a few things that went into that. But I mean, the reality is that I see this article, and I see the talk about the pelvis and everything. It's just thinking about, what are we doing with our programming for age groupers, that it's got to make sense in terms of all of that stuff. You're talking, specifically being able to manage balance in any way, shape, or form. And it's not a perfect translation from what I did for those 2 years into the water, but certainly made me more aware of the things that I had to figure out when I was in the water, because we didn't, and Joel is there. I was a swatter. I grew up on the south side of Milwaukee. I was on a team that nobody liked because we didn't pound the yardage. I think we did doubles during Christmas training for a week, and then in the summer, and nothing outside of that. And it's like, you just have to, once you do some of the stuff, you become more aware of what's around you and how you're able to minimize your effort in certain places to maintain your speed next to somebody. And if you don't have that pool rat situation where you're not just screwing around, or you don't have those things, you don't have that curiosity, or I guess if that makes sense. I keep rambling, but
no, you're making a lot of sense.
Yeah. The long and short is I don't know if there's enough. Coaches are so into that objective, like number of qualifiers at tags, like in Texas, or, your LSC champions and your first place. And it's like all these metrics. And then it's this situation where we understand this part, lots of yards, going faster, but then this challenges that, and it pisses people off because they don't like to be wrong, when in reality, they should just be letting the kids spin around in the pool. Like, just go to water and spin your body without using your hands and legs. Just use your core. But I'm hoping this is like the beginning of it, but people have to really be open-minded. And that's what we run into here.
But I don't know that this necessarily, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think, and the reason coaches are concerned with those outcomes is because that's what we're being evaluated on. Ultimately, that's
yes, I know all too well.
That's what that's how people decide whether we're good or not, and that's what gets us the next job, or the raise, or the promotion, or whatever, like that,
or the retention
of swimmers.
Right.
I mean, people care about all of that stuff. I'm not sure this is really saying, I don't know that I take away anything it's saying about specifically how you should train. I think actually it really does a good job of staying clear of that the whole way. Like it doesn't have people may be grafting their own expectations onto what it's saying about how you should train, but I don't think it really has any commentary.
The background and premise though is dry land. Like that is
for sure
hovering in the background. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with these comments, is that this is all about an athlete on land, and then how do you put that into the water? And right now I've seen it, I've done it. It's like the dry land for 10 and 12-year-olds, some stretch cords, some of this, not necessarily the stuff that, that Joel spoke to about just being able to just move and sort it out.
Well, so I want to
learn.
Yeah, I want to ask Joel about some of this, because I think some of the terminology too is maybe I even know it tripped me up reading it. And that happens sometimes too when I'm listening to Joel talk about something and then he just uses a term and I go, I have no idea what that means. And then I have to ask Joel what it means, and then he doesn't explain to me what it means. But I'm going to repeat that process. I'm going to see if actually this time for our audience, Joel will explain some of this stuff. So there's a whole conversation in the middle here about muscle chaining and proprioception.
Right.
And I wonder if you could just help people understand a little bit that piece of it, Joel, as you have understood it.
Sure. I think like proprioception obviously is just going to be the feel for what's going on around you, where your body is in space. And I think that's one of the things, kind of going back to what Eric was just talking about, is I think this article is saying that when you're kind of linearly thinking, whether it's either technique or training, and just kind of building progressively in that line, then like, if basically you have a hammer, then that problem's a nail, and then that problem's a nail, and that problem's a nail, and you're progressing through. And I think what Eric was saying with the movement and stuff is a lot of times that we just go, like we feel the pressure to keep moving those kids forward, as far as like, we've got like a timeline, we have our state meet coming up, they have to be prepared for that. So we need to get to starts and things like that. And so what you might be doing is kind of building a foundation on sand in a sense, because how they're breathing or how they're moving might it be kind of diminished. And there's those critical periods, like Eric was saying, where like as a child develops, they need to do balance. They need to do things like that of how their body's moving. And if you just are like, we need to push through this, that window starts to close. It doesn't mean it's closed forever. You can open it again later, but it's a lot harder to. Like when you're walking with your kid and he has to walk on the curb, you can say, don't do that. You're going to get hit by a car. And you can yell at him all you want, but internally something's saying, I need to walk on this curb because I need to develop my balance. Right. And so with proprioception, that critical moment is being developed in that early stages. And so if you're like, again, you have 40 kids and they're all under the age of 8 and it's a bunch of cats running around everywhere, you're just trying to get them in a line, moving in one direction. And so in a sense, you're maybe dumbing down that proprioception a little bit, rather than, again, we talked about that Michael Andrews interview. There's lots of it we didn't enjoy, but the part that he didn't talk about was like, as he's doing breaststroke, he could feel the people swimming behind him. And like, you're thinking, well, is it like a metaphorical thing, or is it a reality? Like he actually can feel the water so differently that he can actually feel the wake from someone else 10 feet over behind him on his body. And again, that is elite proprioception, where you can feel those different pressures. Or like, I think we take for granted too, like those Olympians when they're going through the white water of starts and relays and things like that. Their ability to find water and hold water in that turbulent environment is elite level proprioception. And again, that's something that developed, and you're like, well, how did you teach that? You didn't teach it. They taught it themselves. And so basically, as a coach, I think what this is saying is maybe start creating lots of different scenarios where they can kind of feel that out. Yeah. And so again, you can have like an obstacle course involved in their recovery. So if you're big on 10-100's best average, their recovery is maybe something to do with that. But again, some way of linking those things in, and not just thinking I've got an energy system. So to train proprioception, it's like, again, it's that Manny Pacquiao, or like you said, the so-called schlub in Creed, where you're like, how did he train like that? It's like, well, he just fought a lot and he figured out if I keep moving this way, it doesn't hurt so much when I get hit. And that's kind of the proprioception. And then the chaining of things is something I just started kind of reading about. So I'm definitely no expert at all on that. But the idea of, again, linking things from the hips outward is especially when we're in space, is if you watch how a swimmer was going to reach up for something, like if you're in the weight room, there's like the 10-pound weights are up higher. And so like most athletes are going to reach up and just pull it down, and they're stable at their base. And so there's kind of a linkage of the muscles going from the core out to the extremity. swimmer basically like slides their shoulder up and then reaches for something. And so now they've got basically a shoulder that's no longer connected to their body. It's an isolated movement. And now that's where you create that danger, because all that load goes like a lever into your shoulder joint. And so again, they haven't really learned how to kind of sync those chains together, is how I'm interpreting it. Again, I could be way off, and maybe 1 out of our 6 listeners would be like, you're an idiot, which is fine. Because I really would like to learn more about that, because that's exactly what it is, being able to sequence that movement. And what I think in this article, they're talking about kind of explosion versus implosion, kind of that I'm going to set my hand in the water and then everything kind of gears around that, versus how you're getting the hand to the water from core outward. And again, I think when we go to that reductionist kind of progression kind of thing of building things, we're thinking how a muscle looks strong versus how this muscle functions with this muscle. So like when I took exercise phys in the 90s, we always talked about the muscles, and the fascia was just the stuff that wraps everything. And I think that's where we're starting to get into, is the fascia being something where it's going to actually conduct some of the rhythm between the muscles and help integrate the muscle movements more, rather than isolating the movements. So I don't know if that was a really long-winded nothing answer.
No,
or if that helped.
I think you know more about it than you have, because I think even when you were helping me on my still not begun breaststroke comeback, and even just taught me how to scull on breaststroke, it was the first time I thought about very clearly the idea that I was going to like resist water, okay, but that it wasn't going to just be my hand and my wrist, that my hand and my wrist was going to connect to my forearm, was going to connect to my bicep, was going to chain then to my shoulder, which was going to chain into my back, which was going to chain into my hips, right? And this terminology of implosion versus explosion, I think to me suggests that it's not only additive, right? It's not only like you have X strength and then you add this, and then you add this, and then you add this next piece, but that actually each, like the more you can get everything sequenced, it enhances the strength of what's down the line in the sequence, right? And so if you have an explosion, you've successfully chained all the way through, and you have exponentially more power at the end.
Right. Exactly. So, yes.
A force multiplier.
You knew that.
Right. Yeah. I'm just terrible at explaining things though. So, but that's exactly it, is like, again, when you reduce things, and the more things are away from the body, especially like the shoulder blade, you think about how swimmers always have the weakest shoulders, and like we should have the strongest shoulders. And that's the thing, is no one's really been able to answer. And I think the answer is, again, when we do so many things, that's why not a big fan of the early vertical forearm thing, is I think a lot of times what will happen is those people will start to slide their shoulder. And so again, when you have the linear thinking of what's that one vitamin we need, you're like, these all have high vertical forearms early in the stroke. We're great, but you don't just look at that, like look at from the hip to the shoulder to that, and see what the sequence is. Are you going early vertical forearm, and then that affects the shoulder, and then that affects the core? Or are you watching from the core going outward, and the vertical forearm in alignment with all those other joint angles? That's going to work. Early vertical forearm on its own is going to actually start to damage the shoulder, in my opinion.
Yeah. We got to get back to that. Streamlines are bad.
EVF is for suckers.
EVF is for suckers.
Yeah, I think.
And don't even look at the water, says Eric. Eric says, don't even touch the water with your body. It'll make you worse at swimming. I believe that's the distillation of what we've said on this podcast.
So I think what I got from the article I wrote down was that the quality of the movement is basically, it's constructed of technique, which is going to determine the alignment of the body and the movement and the rhythm. You have the stroke mechanics, which determines the applied forces, and the stroke articulation determines the origin of the movement. And I think that's the part, is the stroke articulation, the origin of the movement. And like Eric said earlier, is a lot of times I think we just get caught up in movement. We think what's the moving thing, and you look at the moving thing, which is going to be the arm or leg, which is lots of splash, lots of movement, versus the hip, which is a lot more subtle movement and things like that, or the relationship of the center of mass and the center of buoyancy. It's another thing. It's like it's a subtle movement, so it really doesn't really draw the eye as quickly. And so what we need to think about is the articulation, is the origin of the movement and how that goes out that chain.
Yeah. I mean, I was telling you guys, when I read this piece, I had practice, and I was doing something which I've never been a huge fan of having kids kick with boards, but on the team, we have kids kick with kickboards. And it actually helped me to understand something I don't like about kicking with kickboards, or an outcome that comes from kicking with kickboards. But it also helped me to figure out how to mitigate some of what I didn't like about kids kicking with kickboards. And I was just watching all these kids kick with kickboards, and they've got their arms propped up on a board. Their shoulder is sort of like hunched over, into this. And then they've got a sloping downwards. In many cases, they have their back sloping downwards, and then their hips somewhere below the water, and then their legs straight out from that. And they were trying to move from that position. And I just started pulling swimmers out one by one, putting them in the position that they were trying to kick in, and putting a kickboard in front of their shin and going, okay, now move this kickboard. And they couldn't. They could apply almost no force on land to it. I'm sure they felt like they were applying force in the water. It's one of the things, I think, the issues of proprioception in the aquatic environment. It feels forceful even when you're completely weak and not really doing anything. Right. And then I was like, okay, now let's try to get your posture as far as we can manage it perfect. Right. And try again. Right. And I try it again, and they'd make a little effort and just push the kickboard right out.
I think that's this article in a nutshell too. I think there's so many, like when you think about kick, it's like, it's a linguistic issue. It's also like where they're taught issue. And it's also the isolation of the movement issue. It's like linguistically, you think about every kid that's been in a swim lessons, you tell them to kick, like the only reference they have is kicking a soccer ball, kicking a ball, kicking a sister, kicking a couch, whatever they're kicking. It's a different muscle. It's a different movement. Than actually, holding water with the legs. And then they go into lessons and they're told to kick. And right away, every instructor ever is like, let's see the splash. Want to see the splash? Because then their legs are going up and down. And the splash is obviously, it's not what you want in the water at all. You think about, again, how much effort it takes to lift and throw water out of the pool. Well, that's energy that's not going into propulsion. It's a lot of energy. So again, proprioceptive, it feels forceful. It feels like it's doing something because your quads are burning, but it's not engaged. And now you take it again a step further, like you're saying, when you have that lower back arch like that, the shoulders up, the lower back arch, if the gait pattern comes from the lower back, and all of a sudden that's out of alignment, now it's not really a gait. It's not a movement, again, involving the hips. It's just, again, it's quadriceps, just thump, 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 thump. And as an eye, you're like looking like that looks like the splash we need. And I think when you think about the splash, if it's going straight up, I can drop a toilet, drop a bowling ball into a toilet, water's going to go straight up. Nothing's moving, again. So anything that's moving quickly to the water, that splash stays like boiling underneath the water and is pushing backwards. And I remember like years back, the first duel in the pool with Australia in the United States, and that one woman from Australia, like she broke the world record in women's by swimming in Phelps's wake.
Libby Lenton. Yeah.
And you think about, again, the amount of wake to move that much water, which is, again, the amazing thing with these elite swimmers when they can do that. I mean, was it a 10-foot lane with really great lane lines, not the stuff that we have in our pools, but just going right down the middle of the pool. He's creating a wake so big and so wide that another elite swimmer is able to find that soft spot in the water and ride it. It is just an amazing. But if, again, you see the kick is there's a little bit of splash, but anytime there's a splash, that's actually kind of a flaw. It's him losing grip of the water. Cause again, you want that contact all the time. And we were talking about that a little bit earlier, is thinking about like, you can exert your influence on the water. You can like just pound water. Doesn't mean you're holding the water. So again, it's about traction and not about splash and the quick movement. Again, it's and that's the really cool thing when you're watching and you start to just shift, like this article is asking you to shift your lens a little bit rather than from what think about the stuff that might be going on. Like maybe there's something else I can get out of this besides like, hey, how many hundreds on 105 do you think Phelps did before he did this race? You're like, what are some of the other things that went into this swim? What are the other things?
What's Ledecky holding on 15 ones? I mean, that's what we need to know.
But it's I think the article, and someone has said something like that too, where the idea is these athletes are picking something up out of the water. Again, we all said, obviously, to get someone to a level of Phelps, it had to be great coaching. But then we're also, as the people sitting in the audience that ask a listening, you're like, well, they always want to throw stones. And we're really so fast to just, gut every other swim coach. Like, well, if you have Phelps, why aren't there 20 other Phelpses? With the idea, in a sense, where it's a good question is not like you're a bad coach, obviously. It's that if you have a template that works, shouldn't the template work for more than just one? Shouldn't it work for a lot of others? And so that's the idea, is what did this one get out of that template? Because the template's good. It obviously got like a Phelps or insert whatever Olympian into that model. The template worked to get that one person to that level. Why aren't there 4 more? And I think that's a good earnest question, not a critical question of like, obviously you suck. You coach the guy that has however many world records. Like, it's what did that guy get out of it? Was it because like Eric, where he's like in the pool and he was figuring stuff out on his own? What were those moments that Phelps was figuring things out? Is his nervous system just so much better, and we have to all go, yep, we'll never get that again because he's just so much better? Or can we start to go like, what was it that he picked up out of this? Because we can all take whatever workout plan we want out of asking. We're just going to go, everyone, this is what Janet Evans did back in the day. Well, how come they're not Janet Evans? Well, okay, well then we'll take Jenny Thompson, the next Olympian. Like, okay, well that day, now we're taking Ledecky, and we're just putting that template on versus, again, the foundation of what was it, again, that they had that these don't. And I think a lot of that is going to be based, again, on proprioception. It's going to be on breathing. A lot of the mechanics you see now, and that's why I got out of like coaching masters now and about coaching like Division III kids. Like, what did they, like, in a sense, mislearn? What is it, something they picked up that all of a sudden became, that was like obviously good intentioned, the coach meant well, but became maladaptive. And once you can reverse that, I think a lot of the stroke technique comes out of it. And that's one of the things they said about in this article is stroke technique changes that don't work. It's because you've fixed, like, again, you fixed the technique, or you fixed the stroke, you fixed articulation, but you didn't fix the origin. What's creating this origin of the movement? Is it, again, they're panicking on a breath? Is it they just don't have connection with their body? Yeah.
Eric, you want to bring this one home, or I've got another question for Joel?
No. I mean, ask another question. I don't really have a whole lot to add to that point, unless you have a question for me. Because
we are getting into the nerd part of this, and I here, of course, as we get to the end, I do think another big takeaway of this will be Joel asks Bob Bowman, why didn't he produce 4 more Phelps? That's the key headline that I think most people should take away from this. Joel wants to know.
And that's, that's exactly what would drive, but that's exactly, again, goes back to our first topic. That's where to drive us 18 people. Like, we're going to click in and we're going to comment.
Right. That's what I should title this. Why aren't there 4 more Phelps?
Why didn't you versus, hey, why do you think that you didn't?
Yeah.
And again, it's a semantic thing. And I think so much of this is semantics. We talked about like the rules of the game, where everyone's like pissed off, like, don't tell me the rules of the game.
Yeah.
I've coached.
So another thing I want to ask you in regards to, if you're getting into a really good conversation around kicking there. And I think you understand, again, I'm going to pretend to compliment you, and then maybe you won't explain it very well, and then I'll have to try and circle back around. But I feel like you understand this better than me. So I'm going to field it to you. And that is, in terms of the amount of tension you can put on water, isn't there an issue too as well? If you leave the water, right, and then you're coming back in, correct me if I'm using the terminology wrong, but isn't the water like a little bit less dense as you're coming back in, so you can't press on it as hard, right? After you enter the water again, you have to get to a certain depth to be able to resist sort of more against the water. Am I describing that correctly?
I think you're absolutely right. I think like the easy answer would be like, well, you get these pockets of air and you see all those bubbles in the splash and things like that, versus like, again, if someone has contact with the water, you see, or watching like a trout, any kind of fish moving, if there's bubbles, the bubbles are moving in whatever the rhythm of the kick is. It's not like these pockets of plunging. And I think even like that Cecil Collin book, so maybe the 21st century one, he talks about like the pockets that you see as someone that swam down the pool. You'll see these pockets of bubbles and they'll be lingering for quite a while. So that's a lot of energy that went down but didn't create contact. And I think that's when we start correcting symptoms rather than going to the source. Right. And so you keep on doing that. And so you're absolutely right with that. It's like air goes in there, but also I think the nervous system is really hard to catch up to that. All of a sudden you're going from air, which everything makes sense, the gravity and stuff, to all of a sudden surrounded by water, surrounded by air, surrounded by movement. And I think it's really hard, again, when we think again, well, Lochte can do this. Again, these are elite level, proprioceptive monsters. I mean, they can do things that we can't. LeBron James can do things that we can't. And that's, I think, our goal as a coach is not just to figure out what was the training paradigm behind making those people, but what was it that we didn't really see? What was it, again, that made Manny Pacquiao, connect everything so well? And so like what you're saying with the kick is, again, if they have constant engagement with the water, I would think for a schlub like myself for swimming, constant engagement would mean that, again, I'm not like fooling my nervous system with all of a sudden really fast, easy, to all of a sudden a little bit slower. Again, it's not a ton slower, but again, it's enough where the nervous system can get fooled by that. So I think you're absolutely right, where again, the changes in density, the water layers get thicker and thicker as you go. Yeah. The speed of the arms over the water versus the speed under the water in a movement, like a cyclical movement like that, it'd be like basically biking where, the lower half of the bike chain is going to be in mud and the upper half is in air. It's like fast, slow. Again, what that does to the nervous system, but then also what this is saying is all those puzzle pieces, obviously that does something to the nervous system, but obviously it also has some effects into the training because it uses a lot more energy when you're not going at a consistent like cycle rate. And all of a sudden your cycle rate actually has lots of little blips in it. And too many times, again, we're just looking at, again, anytime we're trying to isolate one thing, we're not really isolating what we want to see. We've talked about blood lactate, for instance. Blood lactate is what's in the whole system. What's producing the blood lactate is more of like what you're trying to get at. And so the same thing here is like what you're trying to get at is that feel for the water. Or you talked about how much tension you can put onto the water. It's the same as like what Eric was saying when you're doing chords. At the top of the chord, you can rip it through, no problem. But again, there's a certain amount of tension because again, you're not looking to rip through water. You're looking to hold a spot and continue to hold it through the whole stroke pattern so your body can move over that point. So, and that was the whole Boomer thing of shifting the focus from your body in exerting versus your body moving. And that's what changes everything. Yeah.
Well, I think we're coming up on the hour and I know you got to stop here at this time, Joel. So I want to make sure we get you done on time. I hope people enjoyed listening to this. I hope you guys go and read the article. I hope we can get Jukka. I'm not even going to attempt his last name until I speak to him. If and when we get him on here, if you got a question for him, you can, I decided I would start taking questions. You can use my never used Twitter account at CD Swim Coach. I don't even know what my own Twitter handle is. You can find me on Twitter.
Maybe you can put it in the description of the video.
No. That's too much work, Eric. People just, find me on Twitter.
That's an adequate amount of work for being somebody who produces content.
No, we won't do that. You can send them to me there. I know actually there's been a number of people who've really enjoyed our job opportunity analysis. So I might even do by myself a bonus pod tomorrow. But if you have more jobs you want me to just pop off and give my opinion on, I'm happy to take a look at those and give a little advice there. But thanks to everybody for joining, and I'll try to work in some stories about Don Fraser's training logs at a later time. That's just a teaser, you guys, you'll get that. But thank you everybody for listening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so
all right.
275.
I'm turning the camera back on because this is bonus content.
we had two other coaches. His brother was easily 3 mils, and then we had another guy that was like 3 mils. So yeah, I'm not surprised.
So if anyone's catching in on the bonus content, I just wanted to clarify that no one hates the SWAT coaches or team because they did less work than everyone else. It was because, again, you go to the hospitality room, you're like, hey, it's lasagna day. Great. I don't have to use my per diem like over at the Applebee's. I can just have lasagna right here. And you go in there and these dudes had finished that already. There's nothing left except the little cherry tomatoes and ranch. You're like, well, I can have a bowl full of that. Thanks a lot.
And hey, it was Wisconsin, so there was at least some Kringle left.
That's true. And it's Wisconsin where you thinking Big Eater, you don't know Big Eater till you've seen Wisconsin Big Eater then.
No, not at all.
These are the people, again, where it's like the all you care to eat. It was like at a certain point, they're like, no, you've destroyed our profit margins. You need to clear house. Get out.
Yeah, you've been here 2 hours. You leave now.
Right.
Anyway, Dawn Frazier, okay, only trained half a year in the pool. She only swam half a year. This is what I learned from reading this book, because she was swimming outdoors in Australia. So it was only, the weather was only conducive to training for swimming half the year. I mean, probably in unheated pools, if we're being totally honest. So she would wait until it got warm enough and she'd do her swimming. And the other half of the year, she essentially, did a little bit of dry land. And that was the best women's swimmer in the entire world.
But you think about, again, what her daily life would be. I mean, you read about like how people, like the comfort level people feel in rooms now is like up to like, it has to be like 72 degrees. Otherwise it's a little chilly. It's like part of it's just because we don't move. If you're moving around, 68 degrees is fine. You go into a gym, you walk in, it's like it's cold, but then you start moving around, all of a sudden it's pretty good. It's because we used to move around a lot more. And so Dawn Frazier's like, oh, I didn't do anything, 6 months of the year I swam. And then the other 6 months I did nothing. Her nothing was like still burning 4,000 calories a day, probably nothing.
Right.
My nothing is, oh my God, nothing. Like laying on a couch, scrolling through Netflix. And that just wasn't an option, And so I listened to like, stories about Shane Gould and things like that. Her just kind of getting in swimming again is Eric Weichen pool rat stuff in surf and things like that, where again, you all of a sudden the wave hits you and you're underwater and you've got to figure out like how not to panic, because you just got wiped out by a wave, you got slammed hard on the ground, how to get back to the surface and swim 10 miles back. Or the idea of like, New Zealand dudes getting in like small little, outriggers, paddling like 10 miles to just go get in a fight with whatever island might next to theirs, fight, get back in their kayak or their outrigger, paddle 10 miles.
So one of the things that was interesting that you mentioned earlier, Joel, that I wanted to stay focused on the article, but you were talking about how different ideas pop up independent of one another all across the world. I'm big into swimming history. And one of the really interesting things I've always returned to is basically the modern freestyle stroke, the crawl that became the modern competitive freestyle stroke, was found independently in indigenous populations that had no contact with each other. That literally, like when the British were doing breaststroke because they're a bunch of jabronis. And they made it down to Australia and they found like, oh, what's this? And like indigenous people in Australia were swimming crawl. And
it's interesting.
Indigenous people in North America were swimming crawl. So all these populations all spread across the world had independently figured this is the fastest way, most efficient way for me to move through the water.
I don't know. Well, that's the thing is it's not the most efficient way. Breaststroke.
Okay, sorry, the fastest is the fastest.
But yeah, exactly. And that's the thing that's really interesting about that, because you think most of our movements, this article referenced it too, is like we're so much into conservation of energy because that's where we came from, where we're like, it used to be food was scarce. And so we'd conserve energy as best we can. So that's where posture goes bad and things like that. And so for something like that, where they're swimming, generally it's like, we're not going to outswim a fish. And so you're going to conserve as much energy as you can, because it's going to be more of a survival thing. How do I just fell off the boat. How do I get back to the boat? It's not about quickly.
Yeah.
But then again, obviously there are some survival things where you need to do quickly. And so to figure out, I'm wondering again, just because, we're bipedal, like all of a sudden, like a bipedal swimming stroke, maybe that's where it evolved from. And the idea that you need some traction from the hands and the arms to get that bipedal movement going, starts to get that feel for the water. But yeah, that's really interesting how things will develop independently. And that's when you kind of think that this obviously must be right. If you can read these different things or see these different things, it never comes up with the same conclusion.
If they had any kind of boat and paddle situation, was there a connection from, okay, this is how you paddle on a boat moves. This is how I should be paddling in the water, because it only makes sense that you would connect those two, since that's where you're at.
Good point.
I mean, a very good point, Eric, because if you think about the concept of the rowboat, where you like sit and you're essentially doing the breaststroke of paddling, you're going kind of like backwards and pushing this direction versus all these indigenous societies where they essentially had canoes and they're
either down one or they had the double at some
or a kayak.
Right. That's interesting.
So basically the British just came up with the stupidest way to do everything and managed to conquer the entire world somehow in the process of doing that.
That's really interesting. It is like that. And I wonder too, like how much, again, the YouTube kind of a thing, and not bashing, like, again, what the content has become of, like NC State, let's do the kicking on a Swiss ball kind of, not that they did that, but again, the idea of, again, the quick music, the fun kinds of things to watch, if that ends up guiding how swimming becomes, and we've seen that with short course yard swimming, how fast everybody was at this past NCAAs. And I'm interested to see how much it translates into long course, because long course, you have to swim. At some point, no matter what the event, except for the 50s, you're going to have to, even in the 50, you got to swim at some point in long course meters. You can't just kick it out, do 3 strokes and do another turn. I'm interested.
There was a perfect caricature of what you described earlier. I watched Bret Hawk live yesterday, and the first part, they were, they had like the agenda on the right side. The first part of the agenda was just fast swims, which as far as I know, consisted of them watching Lewis Burris's 50 free from Great Britain trials, Josh Liendo's 50 free from Canadian trials, and maybe they watched one other 50 free, and then somebody, I think maybe it was Kyle Sockwell, was like, should we watch that guy Lucas Martins, the German guy who just went the second fastest 400 free ever? And everybody was like, nah, too long.
And
then it was somebody else said, well, maybe we should just watch the last 50. And Brett essentially was like, nah, I'm not interested.
But that's
what it's like recommending things to you two guys. If it's an article that takes more than 3 minutes or a video that's longer than 4. I now have to give you timestamps.
Okay. No. Here, let's get to the bottom of this for all the listeners. Eric once sent us a YouTube video where there was a 5 seconds reference to something that like swimming related deep into this video. I think it was like at the 11-minute mark or whatever, but he didn't.
The most recent one was like 14 and a half.
But he didn't timestamp us at all. So this is
I gave you about where it was.
He just like, hey, watch this. There's a cool swimming thing in it.
Oh, that was.
And I started watching it, and I was like,
oh no, that was a Japanese interview that it was about how Kitajima was an inspiration for a lot of stuff that was going on in it. Yeah, it was a Japanese
I don't know that because I gave up.
And it was like
I gave up before
video.
I got.
It was like 10 minutes. It was somewhere into it. I thought you were referring to the last one, right?
No,
the last told you where
the last one, he gave us just a poor timestamp, and we still gave him a hard time. But really, I did the hard work, and I saved Joel the extra 30 seconds on.
I appreciate that
because I care about him.
I'm old. I'm in the grave.
His time is a much more limited resource for Joel. You can't take it from him like that.
Slipping on by. Yeah, I think that's part of it too. Is like, you remember like the late breath breaststroke. Is that the new way of doing it? And versus like. But again, it's like that's what we're all about, is the hot take. And so I think what this article is kind of saying is like, why does it work? Instead of like, oh, this is not the way, they should just teach him to do, Kitajima's breaststroke. Because like the takeaway is, again, the quality of the movement of like how a guy that has really long, maybe disproportionately long legs versus the body versus Kitajima is like, again, like balance. Like, again, if he reaches his arm span might be like 5'10", and he might be 5'10", versus a Phelps who might reach 7'2", and he's 6 feet.
Right.
And that's the huge thing is we're always like, okay, we're going to just take that template and put it on every kid we have. And again, every kid you have that has 7 foot arm span, all of a sudden, wow, they're doing great with this. But again, we're like, well, we got 50 kids, we got 5 that are really good, so that's perfect. And I'm going to be at ASCA because now these 5 are great. Versus again, where that question of like, well, if that's working, then why aren't they all really good with that? Where's every one of your qualifiers? And that's every one of our resumes. Well, where's your Olympian? Can't believe you're bashing Schubert for no Olympians. Like, now we're bashing him because he's not a good human.
Because he's the physical embodiment of the Prince of Darkness on Earth. Yeah, that's why.
But yeah, that's the thing is it's not about. I think so many times we're like, oh, that guy can't coach. Or we're like, oh yeah, try to keep that kid from getting fast. They're amazing. But again, it's an earnest question, but it's often too many times wrapped in a snarky comment down in the bottom of Swimswam. Obviously, You don't know anything. But again, I think that is the total litmus test now. It's just like, how many comments does that 50 freestyle get? Oh my God, look at and shares and clips versus like, hey, look at this 400 IM. Yeah, it's okay. We're good.
Yeah. Did he outsplit? What was her name? Yishi Win or whatever? That's always what it comes back to. A lot of these 400 IMs. Did they outsplit that one young woman from China? Yeah. On the last 100. Like, how did she go that fast? It always comes back to the ones that cheat. I just kept, while you guys were finishing the actual content, I just kept thinking about this article and articles like it, and just conversations in general that makes people so uncomfortable and immediately shut down. And the irony in that is that we ask kids to be in this place, like the only way to improve is like be uncomfortable or get comfortable,
be open to learning, and
all that crap that ends up on the back of t-shirts. And then we present to you, which is essentially an introduction and by and large an easily understandable one if you paid attention at all in science class. And I can immediately see people just shutting down because they're using words that have more than 6 syllables or more than 2 syllables even, and it's just like, I worry. And you're talking about like making it easy. And I know for some coaches who have a lot of background, it's like, well, just tell me what the payoff is. It's like, no, you have to read it. But at the same time, I'm hoping that with this and where it goes and where we go with it, that some of that stuff is at least kind of starting to happen, because there are some coaches who have zero background and they need some of that, distill it down to the easiest common denominator. I just hope it doesn't end up where we end up all being too smart for them. We end up being too snarky like we always are.
Oh, we always are.
And then the group that understands turns them off to being a part of the group that understands.
I'm actually going to say, give a more charitable examination of the way people read this article. And it has to do with my own experience back when I, didn't just do a podcast, but I actually, wrote stuff online that, at least some people consumed. Probably the most consumed stuff I ever did was way back in the day when Flow Swimming was a very popular swimming website. And Garrett and I would get into arguments because he would say, like, people don't really want to read. It's like they just want to watch a video. It's funny. We've heard echoes of that in this. And I would go like, yeah, but it's still important to produce stuff that people can read. But I would find that, if I took a really like controversial take on somebody, then we got like a gigantic sort of flame war in the comment section, and it drove a lot of commentary and stuff. If I was really truly thoughtful and fair and spent a lot of time on something and really sort of developed what I had, it would get almost no commentary. And I would think on my end, you can see how the feedback loop is broken on this stuff. Cause I would go, well, did people hate that? Cause I'm not getting any feedback, and the only feedback people have to give. And I would start reaching out to people I knew, and they'd go, no, that was really good. And I just read it and went,
exactly.
Well said, man. And I didn't want to leave a comment on it or whatever, which I think there could be like a lot of people that there's no culture around like reading an article like that. Well, none of us commented. None of us got on there and went, wow, this is just really good.
Well, if they had given,
correct.
If I had the contact information, do you have his contact information?
I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I work in my international sources.
That was awesome.
Yeah, but
now I think part of it too is like, again, I'm not going to the National Enquirer for thoughtful insight into things.
Sure.
I'm not going to Swimswam for thoughtful insight into
right.
this stuff. But again,
totally, it doesn't fit.
but the problem, yeah, exactly, totally doesn't fit. But the problem is, where would you go? And that's the thing, is we end up kind of just emailing people we know, and I think that's where we started becoming more and more insular. I also remember when I was in grad school, this is classic like 90s grad school thing, where this one woman was like, I didn't understand this part in this. It was an exercise phys text. I didn't understand this chapter. And the professor's like, did you read it again? He's like, yeah, I've read it twice. I don't get it. And she's getting kind of combative. He's like, read it again. And that's all he said. She came back and she was complaining because I went to his office hours. I said, I read it again. You know what he told me? Read it again. And he just kept on saying, and then finally she like got combative in class, like, oh, this is gonna be awesome. And so she's like, you know what? I'm paying tuition, blah, 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 blah. I want, why aren't you explaining this to me? He's like, because this is a graduate level class. I'm not here to give you foundational knowledge. Plus, when you're outside in the world, you're going to read things that are going to be tough, and you need to read them again. You need to read them again, because you didn't understand them, didn't make it not truthful. It didn't mean the information's not there. You just need to come to it versus it coming to you. And that's exactly, I think, where we're getting, is like, we expect information to come to us versus us going to it. And when I read this, again, just the quality of movement was enough to lock me in, where I'm like, I'm going to read this again and again until I understand it. Right. And I think a lot of times now people are like, well, again, if you're like quality of movement, okay, more arts and crafts BS next. And I get why people, again, skim out of it, or bagging on Eric for like, that 5-second clip somewhere within, is, again, we're like, is this really going to hit home with me or not? And so our waiting for a payoff has shifted down to like, you've got whatever it is in a clip, I'm sure you probably get the data, like, when did someone click off a YouTube video? 10 seconds in, you've got 10 seconds for this song to have a hook to it, or I'm not listening to it. You got 10 seconds for a YouTube clip I'm going to give you, and then I'm not going to listen to it. And so I think that's why we have that so much controversial, like, I hate, and then insert whatever the coach of the day or the swimmer of the day, and like, ooh, I hate. Now I'm interested. The thing that's really made Facebook take off, not now anymore, but what did was when they switched to the dislike button, because they figured out dislike is far more powerful and keeps people on far longer than the like button ever did. And they've obviously tracked everything. so they must now.
All right. I do have to go and eat now. I gotta go.
I know you look a little smaller.
I do.
Your
I'm
traps
shrinking.
are like decreased a little bit.
I'm shrinking. Yeah.
All right,
I gotta work
with
on that. Bye, guys.
Good talking to you guys. See ya.
All right. See ya.